So we're going to be talking with Julia Hogan. I'm going to bring her into this chat very soon here. But before we begin, I hope this is a fun time. We would really love it if people have questions about mental health, finding the right therapist. Please comment to us here in this live feed. We'll be answering those questions and many more. But first, I just want to say on an important note that if you are experiencing dark or suicidal thoughts, please call the suicide prevention line at 1-800-273-8255. There is hope and there is help out there for you. With that said, I'm going to now invite Julia Hogan into this Instagram Live, and hopefully I don't disconnect everybody. So let's. Julia, hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us here at Grotto Network.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually very excited to be here and chat all things mental health and hopefully answer everybody's questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give people just a little bit of background on you, you are a counselor in Chicago and owner of Vita Optimum Counseling and Consulting.
Mm-hmm.
You lead workshops on topics related to self-care, relationships, mental health. Your book, It's Okay to Start With You, is all about the power of embracing your authentic self through self-care. You've also written some really wonderful stuff for us at Grotto already that has really helped a lot of people. So really excited to have you here tonight.
Thank you. Yes, that's my bio. That's what I do. My days are pretty much split between working with clients and then doing a lot of writing projects and things like that. So, but yes, I'm very passionate about authentic self-care, so that really taking care of your well-being, which is different than I think some of the more like pop culture messages we get about self-care, which is more, I think, treat yourself, and which is not always a bad thing, but sometimes self-care can look like getting enough sleep or scheduling a therapy appointment or, reaching out to a friend. So I'm very passionate about that, but I love what I do. And I think it's really cool to see just this growing interest in therapy and mental health and mental wellness. And I'm really grateful for all the work that you at Grotto Network are doing to really erase the stigma surrounding mental health and to provide resources and provide insight for people too. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I should say that some of those articles that you've written for us are now live at Grotto, and they're part of a larger campaign that we're doing at Grotto during this season to find a better light. It's the winter with a pandemic, people distanced. It's a hard time. And so at Grotto, we're really trying to help people through their mental health journey. And so really excited to dive in here today. So thank you again.
Same. Yeah.
So I want to break things down. I know for me, when I was starting therapy, there's so many unknowns. And I'd really love it if we could break down step by step how you begin this journey. And this first question that I have for you, it's kind of a big one, but how do you know whether or when you need to see a therapist?
Yes, I think that's a great question, because I think that for many of us, and I know this was true for me before I started going to graduate school and going through my training to be a therapist, that really our reference point, if we haven't been to therapy ourselves, is what we see on TV and in the movies for what therapy is like. So it's hard to know, when do I need to go? How will I benefit from it? So I generally think, or good rule of thumb for if you think that you might need to go to therapy, I think one, if you asked yourself that question, that's probably a good indication that something is going on in your life that you're not sure that you can, that you're not sure that you have the answers on your own, and you need an expert, or you're looking for that outside objective perspective on what to do. So I think if you're asking yourself that question, that's a nudge in the direction that it might be a good fit for you. But in general, if something is going on in your life where it's preventing you from carrying out basically your ability to function on a daily basis, so that could be, on one end of the spectrum, that could be having difficulty getting out of bed in the morning. It could be not, practicing good hygiene, not feeling like you want to shower or eat, things like that. Or it can be that you're so preoccupied or stressed by what's going on that you can't focus at work or you can't focus at school. So if you find that something's going on and it's preventing you from living that full, authentic, flourishing life, a therapist might be the person who can help you just kind of figure things out and come up with a plan to help, address those things so that you can really feel more like yourself again.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the sign for me was going to a Costco and having a panic attack in the middle of the aisles and thinking to myself, something's not right here. Something's not going on.
Yeah, right. Where it's kind of like that light bulb moment where you say, I don't want to keep doing this, right? Like, I need to make a change. This isn't working. I want to be able to go to Costco and buy my, bulk thing of sparkling water or whatever.
Right.
That's what I buy there.
Yeah.
And just enjoy it and not be worrying that you're going to have a panic attack every time you go in. So I think those moments where you say something has got to change because I can't keep doing this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you say to someone who says, yeah, I might be struggling, but I'm maybe not extreme enough, or it's not that bad. I don't need a therapist.
I think one thing that it's important to remember is that therapy is not one size fits all. And so I can tell you that I have many clients who are struggling with anxiety right now. And every single one of them is different because they're different people, right? So it's not this cookie cutter. You have to be, a 7 out of 10 in your level of symptoms, or you have to have, it has to manifest itself in a specific way. If there's something that you feel like you need an outside perspective or some kind of support to help you work through it, no matter how small or how, big and overwhelming it is, I think finding a good therapist can help get those answers for you. So, I've had clients who've come in for just a handful of sessions because they're thinking about making a career change or they're not sure what to do about a relationship. And then I have people that I've been working with for years because they've gone through some kind of trauma in their life, which takes a long time to unpack and heal from. And everything in between. So I think that you don't have to prove the legitimacy of what you're going through. You don't have to prove that it's severe enough. If it's bothering you, if it's preventing you from really feeling like you're you and being able to just live life and enjoy it, then that's enough to want to take action. You don't have to prove that your suffering is important enough or your struggle is important enough. If it's bothering you, it is important.
That's such a great point, Julia. That really is. I want to bring in a question from our community here.
Yeah.
From at Becky Ottman. And then this one's a tough one. Is going to therapy an admission of failure, and should I feel guilty for it?
Ooh, thank you, Becky. That is a good question. I love it. I do think because in our culture, there is this stigma surrounding mental health and therapy that it can feel like a last resort. So oftentimes someone who comes for first session with me, I hear a lot, I've tried everything else, nothing else worked. And then I just decided, fine, I have to go to therapy, right? It's like a last resort, which I understand because I think that when you make that first therapy appointment, you're saying, okay, I don't think I can handle this on my own. And that does take a lot of courage. It's not easy always to do. And I totally appreciate that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it takes a lot of courage to come in. And so I think one thing that I find helpful and I share often with my clients is if you broke your leg and you decided not to go to a doctor, I think your friends and family would be wheeling you in to the ER, scheduling a doctor's appointment, saying, go get that cast, go get that leg, refusing to go see someone who can help you relieve all of this pain, set your leg so that it's healed for life, and it's not going to heal in a weird way. And I think that we need to get to a point where we're thinking about going to therapy in that same way, that it's not something that you feel guilty over. It's not a failure to go to therapy. It's actually being really smart and saying, I can't handle this on my own. I'm going to go see someone who's spent years studying how to treat these things, who's gone through licensing, this whole licensing exam process, who's trained for years. They're the experts. So it's, you can try to, create your own cast and set your own leg and fingers crossed, hope it, the bones, grow back straight, or you can go and see a professional, right? Same thing with therapy. If you feel like you're struggling with depression or anxiety, or you have a life question, yes, you can try to, figure it out on your own, but you can also just go straight to the expert and get help right away. But I know that it can take a lot of courage, and it can sometimes be, I think, making those mental leaps over any kind of thoughts that it's something to feel guilty for or that it's a failure. But I think that's a pretty common thing to feel.
Sure.
And my hope is that, through talking about this and raising awareness, that it becomes less and less common. But that was a good question, Becky. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Becky. And please, anyone else who's joining in now, please feel free to shoot us a question below. We'd love to hear from you. So you feel like, okay, I need some help. I'm going to reach out for it. How do you start to find a therapist? Where do you go? What do you do? Where do you start that?
Yes. Yes. What does one do when you're looking for a therapist? There's a couple different things that you can do. I think if you're comfortable doing it, asking friends, family, or a coworker that you trust, or a mentor that you trust is always a good way to go, because chances are someone is working with a therapist or knows one who has a good reputation and can recommend that person to you. So I know I often get a lot of emails from people in different states who are wanting to be connected with a therapist in their state. And so I have a few people that I know. And so sometimes it works out that I'm able to send them a recommendation. And I think it's helpful for people to know, okay, I'm going to see someone that's kind of vouched for. So if possible, getting that word of mouth referral, I think, is a great way to go. If you are looking for someone who's more of a faith-based therapist, or your spirituality or your faith is really important to you, you can go on websites like Psychology Today and click on Find a Therapist, and then you can search by insurance, and then you can also do specialties. So you can do faith-based or Christian and that sort of thing. If you're Catholic and you're looking for a Catholic therapist, there's catholictherapist.com. And you put in your zip code and you can find someone there as well. I'm on there. You can see my face.
Great. Yeah.
But so those are a couple ways. And you can also ask your doctor. A lot of times your doctor will have someone that they like to recommend. So getting a referral from your doctor. And then finally, you can also look on your insurance. So if you're wanting to go through your insurance and just find someone who's close to you or close to work or close to school, I think you can search through your zip code on your insurance website and see who takes your insurance and accepts it. So those are a couple ways, but I would encourage anybody to summon up the courage and ask friends and family for a referral if you can.
That's so great. I just saw a question here come in from at Posh Pong, and he's asking about therapy and the expense, and that sometimes it can seem out of reach for some folks. Can you talk a little bit about, if you're worried about a budget, as so many of us are, how can that fit in?
Yes, absolutely. And I think especially now when there's a lot of economic uncertainty, but we're also struggling and a lot of people are going to therapy, this is a great question. So there's a couple of things. Where do I start?
Sure.
So if you do have insurance, you can search through your insurance provider and usually find someone who accepts it. And often you may have a deductible you need to cover, but then usually there's quite a bit of coverage there, making it more affordable. But if your insurance isn't that great, or you're self-employed, I know that can be a challenge as well. Or if, for whatever reason you don't have insurance, there are actually ways that you can find a therapist, which I think is really great. So some private practices will offer what's called a sliding scale. And basically what that is they have rates that vary according to your income and the number of people in your family. So they might have, for example, it might be $200 per session, right? But then, that number goes down and down and down depending on your income. And so don't be afraid if you find a therapist that you like and they seem like a good fit, don't be afraid to email them or give them a call and ask them if they have a sliding scale, because a lot of places do. Another option would be finding your community mental health. So those locations often offer either very low cost sessions or completely free. Sometimes there's a waiting list, but that's also, I think, a really good option. And then the last one that I'll recommend, which I think not a lot of people know about, but is a good one, is actually going and looking at your local university who has a graduate program in psychology. And usually they'll have a training clinic, because the graduate students there, they need to be practicing with real people to grow in their skills. And so they often offer low cost or free services through that. And the neat thing about that is you're working with someone who is going through the graduate program. So yes, they're learning things, but they're being supervised by an incredibly experienced either psychologist or therapist. And so you're really getting this expert treatment for a fraction of the cost too.
Sure.
So community mental health, asking for a sliding scale option, and then also looking for a training clinic at your local university are all more affordable options for therapy.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I think it's so important for people to know that whatever barriers they might have in their mind for therapy are not as high as they might think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's scholarships out there as well. I know there's the Catholic Mental Health Organization. I know that they do fundraising. They're a nonprofit and they want to help, cover costs for people who aren't able to afford treatment and stuff. So cost feels like a barrier. Please don't give up. There are options out there, and those 3 that I recommended are great places to start.
Wonderful. That's great. So finding the right therapist, what do you look for that first session? What do you ask? How do you make sure that it's a good fit?
Yeah, I think every therapist has a different personality and a different style, and it's kind of like finding that right fit. So someone that you work really well with, someone who you feel comfortable talking to, but who you also know is going to challenge you, because you're not there just to have them agree with you, right?
Yeah.
As nice, that would get kind of boring after a while, right? You'd say, well, come on, help me grow, help challenge me.
Yeah.
So one thing I really encourage people to do is when they're coming into that first session, to have questions. If you want to know what does a typical session look like, write down that question and bring it in. Or if you're wondering, what are some of your office policies, or what's your experience, what's your training? Don't be afraid to ask those questions, because an initial consultation is really that getting to know you, but on both sides, right? It's the therapist getting to know you, what you're looking for, what you're needing, but then also that's your chance to ask questions too. So I always encourage people to start a list on your phone or get a notebook and start writing down those questions, because when you're put on the spot, it's really easy for all those questions to like leave your brain. I know that's happened to me before, where I've gone into a meeting, right? And at the end, the person says, any questions? And then I, oh, no, I'm good. And then I walk out like, actually, yes, I had all of these questions, but they just left in the moment. So jot down those questions, bring them into the first session. And then I think just as far as what to expect in a first session, I know that I think every therapist is slightly different, but usually what happens is a therapist will cover confidentiality, office policies, talk about, what to expect in therapy, and then ask some general questions to get some background from you and to get an idea of what you're looking for in therapy, so that they can formulate a treatment plan. So I think I always tell people the first session is always sort of the weirdest, the most surreal, because you're talking about this stuff with someone, you're taking action on something you've been probably thinking about for a while, and you're bringing up a lot of emotions. It can feel like a lot, but at the same time, it's establishing that working relationship and getting the process started, and it's generally, I think, a lot more smooth sailing there. No matter, even if you're talking about difficult topics, it's a lot easier after that. So as far as what to expect is kind of like an introductory session of getting to know one another and seeing if that therapist style and expertise aligns with your goals together.
I know, I think I went through 3 different therapists before I found the one for me. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, and I'd love to hear some more questions that you might ask, because therapy is for you, right? It's for you and no one else. It's your time. So asking for specific things from your counselor, or you mentioned spirituality being one of those. What are some other questions that you might want to ask that therapist? I know we got a question too from @Miss Michaela Marie about their certification. So in addition to their certifications or just their experience with different topics, what might some of those questions be?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably some good questions to ask just to make sure, or to find out if the therapist is a good fit. Actually, let me backtrack and preface that. by just acknowledging what you said about going through a couple different therapists to find a good fit. I think that's great. And I think that's wonderful for people to hear too, that it's okay to say, this person's not a good fit for me. I need to switch to someone else. Don't feel like you have to like see it through, because then you're wasting your time, and you know your therapist is probably wondering why things are feeling stuck. So don't be afraid to say, I don't think this is a good fit for me. I'm going to keep looking, and to not be afraid to try another therapist, because there's absolutely someone out there who's a good fit for you too. So not to be discouraged, but also to, like you said, really own that therapy is for you, and to not be afraid to find someone who's going to be a good fit for you. So as far as that first session, or when you're setting up the appointment, if you have questions you want to ask, I think asking things like, what is your approach to treating X, Y, and Z? So if you're struggling with anxiety, or you're wanting to learn how to set better boundaries, or you're struggling with depression, or there's some kind of trauma you've gone through, asking, you know, what's your view on this? How do you conceptualize this? How do you like to treat this? You know, and then also, what is your style in therapy? I think that's a great question to ask too, because that really gives you some insight into, you know, are they very, do they have more of a program that they like to work through, and steps that they've identified? Are they a little bit more free flowing and kind of weaving things together? And then thinking about, you know, what you think or how you would feel most comfortable. So some people feel more comfortable with a male therapist. Some feel more comfortable with a female therapist. Age also is important. You know, some people mesh well with someone who's more around their age. Some people prefer someone who's older. So I think asking about their approach to whatever it is that you're dealing with will give you a good idea of kind of what to expect going forward. And then if there's something particular you're looking for, to the question about credentials and licensing, asking if that person has certification in that. So for example, if you've gone through trauma in your life and you're looking for someone who really knows how to work with trauma, asking what kind of training they have, what is their background in trauma, if they've gone through any certification programs, or there's relationship therapy. There are many different certifications you can go through for that as well. So Gottman certified therapists are very, very popular, or emotion focused therapy. So asking for those kinds of certifications. But any therapist that you see who's a licensed therapist has gotten training. Think of them as sort of like your general practitioner. They have training in many, many different areas. And then often we find something, or we're drawn towards something that then we tend to specialize in. But we do have a good working knowledge for the most part of a variety of issues as well.
Wonderful. We got a question here from @SarahToms, and she's wondering, how often should someone go to therapy? And then also she wants to know, how do you know when you should end therapy?
Yeah. Well, sort of the joke for therapists is that we want to put ourselves out of business, right? Our goal is to get to the point where you don't need to come in anymore, because you have the tools, you have the strategies, you have the insight you need. So we do want to put ourselves out of business. Everybody needs to put me into early retirement. Right? But no, that's a great question. And so as far as how often to go, it kind of depends on what you're working on, but usually in the beginning, I know with my clients, I tend to recommend meeting weekly, so that we get a really good cadence going, where we get to know each other. I'm able to gather my client's life history. We come up with a plan together, and then we've got a good kind of rapport going. And then what I tend to find in my practice, at least, and other therapists might have different answers here, but what I tend to find is that my clients will get to a point where they're coming in every other week, or I'm sorry, every week. And then they'll say to me, I feel like not a lot happened this week, or I don't really have that much to say. And if that happens a couple times, I usually take that as an invitation that I think it's time that we kind of like take off the training wheels and stretch it to, maybe every other week. And so that's usually kind of this natural progression till we get to the point where a client is maybe coming in once a month, maybe coming in every 6 months, just for what I call a tune-up or a check-in, just to kind of see how they're doing. But it's usually very organic and based on the client's experience. So I know that maybe that's sort of like a classic therapist answer to say it
Mm-hmm.
depends, but it really does on what you're wanting to work
Sure.
on and what you're looking to get out of therapy. You know, if you're
Yeah.
just if you want to check in once a month to just kind of talk through how the month went, that's an option. Or if you're really needing that support every week, that's another option too. So I think one takeaway to take from this question is that, like I said earlier, therapy is not one size fits all, and that is great because that means you can personalize it. And so if you need to come in every week, that can happen. Sometimes people need to come in multiple times a week. That can also happen. If you're ready to stretch it out and try skipping a couple weeks, that can also happen. So, but I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier, Javi, is being an advocate of your care, right? And saying, this is my session, and I think I want to try skipping a week, or I think I need to come in every week too, that you are encouraged to be an active participant in your healing journey as well.
For sure. For sure. I got another question from Miss Michaela Marie, and she asked, do you suggest a therapy animal like a therapy dog?
My personal secret dream is to get a therapy dog, have him or her go through the training process, and have them in the room with me. That's years down the line. But
Sure.
I do think that animals can be very healing, and I think that they can sense, I mean, they all have different temperaments, right? But I think a lot of animals can sort of pick up on human emotions and sense when we need that comfort. And so I'm a fan of therapy animals. I don't know if that was your question, Michaela, but
yeah. Well, thank you, Michaela. And I'll say I also thought that I was going to have a therapy dog, but my dog is down in the basement. We're trying to keep her from coming up here and barking at everybody. So it wasn't in the cards.
She wanted to participate, right? She's like, I have things to say.
So we're obviously in this wild moment that is unprecedented and presents so many different challenges. And I'm sure one of them is just meeting in person for therapy and having to maybe do therapy over Zoom, maybe having to start therapy and start that relationship over Zoom. How are you navigating that as a counselor, and how would you advise others to starting that relationship?
Yeah, well, it definitely happened overnight. I know that I was back in March. I remember sending an email to all my clients offering the option for them to go virtual if they'd like, but that I was going to be here in person. And then a couple days later, we got our shelter in order place here. And so I sent another email to everybody saying, just kidding, we're going virtual. Here's the link. Let's be flexible. But I have to tell you, I was a little apprehensive personally about going to virtual because there's just such a connection in the therapy room, and it's such a safe space for people to come in and know that, when they walk in my door, that this is the place they can talk about things. And then when they leave, they can leave all of this with me, that they don't have to take it with them. So there's this kind of like symbolic, almost like ritual in coming to therapy. And so I was apprehensive about how that was going to go, but I have to tell you that going to virtual, while it is different, it's been very easy to maintain the work that I've been doing with clients when meeting in person, and then also just start new work with new clients. I have quite a few clients that we started meeting together in the pandemic, so I've never met them in person, but we're doing great work, and we've got a connection that we've been able to form over the virtual platforms. And so I think don't let that be a deterrent for you. I know that for some people, whether it's safety reasons or there's something else that you're going through that you prefer in person. And so I know that there are therapists out there who are following safety protocols and making sure that, clients can come in person too. But don't be afraid of the virtual. And honestly, I think it's more convenient for a lot of people because there's no commute involved. So, my clients who have kiddos, they can just during nap time we can meet, or I have clients who will meet in their car because it's a quiet space. So they've got their phones. So so there's pros too to meeting virtually, but I think don't let that be a reason to not start therapy right now if you can't come in person.
Absolutely. I know I took the meeting in my car route because that space is so important. You're absolutely right. I mean, to be able to enter and leave it all behind. So
Yes,
recommend
and not feel
anybody,
like
yeah.
you're, crouched somewhere.
Exactly,
Like
exactly. Or the
hiding
dog
in a
is going to
closet.
bark or something. Yeah.
Right, right.
Oh, that's great. Um, well, on that note of convenience, um, if somebody's working full time, they've got a busy life, what advice do you give them as far as how to just fit this into their schedule, how to make the time, find the time,
Mhm.
speak to your counselor about what you might be struggling with there?
Yeah. Yes, we are all busy. I think even
Yeah.
though the pandemic has changed a lot of things, life still goes on.
Yeah.
And the things that we're struggling with before the pandemic are still here. And they didn't just go away because our day-to-day lives changed. So, as far as your question, I think that if I heard someone say this once, it just really, I can't remember who said it, but it really rang true for me that if something is important enough to you, you will make it happen. You will
Yeah.
make it a priority. And so I think getting to that place where you say, yes, I'm busy. Yes, there's a million things that I could be doing right now and I could fill my time with, but I'm choosing to make my mental health a priority. And so when I make it a priority, then it happens, right? And I know that's true for me in my life. When I make something a priority, then everything else just falls into line and I'm able to make time for it because I've said this is important, right? And so I think in a time like this where there's a lot where insurance is cover I should say more insurance companies are covering the virtual sessions, more virtual sessions are being offered, it's a lot easier to schedule time with your therapist either early in the morning before work, maybe during your lunch hour. I know I have a lot of evening hours, so I'll see my clients after school and work ends. And I know working from home, you have a lot more flexibility. And so I do have some clients who will schedule therapy in the middle of a workday and just put a little out of office and say they're taking some time for themselves, and then go from there. So I think it's actually, maybe ironically, maybe not, I don't know, easier to make it a priority right now because we have a lot of additional ways to set up a therapy appointment.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something that is so important there about making a time for this is that in my experience and in others who've gone through this, this helps so many other aspects of your life. It might be hard at first to squeeze that hour in your day, but for your professional life, your personal life, it helps. It just helps.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that idea. If you know that you're taking care of yourself or you're making that time to address something that you're not happy with or that you want to change, just knowing empowering and then has a spillover into other areas of your life. Similar way when you exercise, you feel great after you exercise. You're so glad you did it, and then you make healthier food choices, or you're just maybe you want to be more active and you want to kind of carry that momentum forward. And I think it's the same thing when you prioritize your mental health. You are proud of yourself, you feel empowered, and then that, like I said, spills into other areas of your life.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. We got a question here from Miss Michaela Marie. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. Do you have any best breathing practices in case you have anxiety and you may be living alone during the pandemic?
I think living alone during the pandemic is very challenging. And I think it's very, very difficult. So thank you for your question, Michaela. And I think as far as breathing exercises, one of my favorite ones is just going onto if you go onto YouTube or if you have the Calm app, but I know it's subscription based. And so you can find it for free on YouTube. But if you just search Calm breathing exercise, they have this thing called a breath bubble. And it's basically a video of this landscape. I think it's like mountains and a lake. And then there's this bubble that expands and then contracts and has this beautiful calming chime as it expands and contracts. And the idea is that you're breathing in as the bubble expands, and then you're breathing out as the bubble gets smaller. And so it gives you this visual to follow with your eyes, and then it guides the breathing that you're doing. And so that's one of the ones that I really like with that. But basically, I mean, for anybody who is interested in deep breathing, I know that it's something that's talked about a lot, you know, mindfulness and meditation, and therapists are always, we're always talking about deep breathing, but for good reason. And that is because it, when you breathe in through your nose and then breathe out slowly through your mouth, and you breathe out longer than you did when you were breathing in. So for example, if you breathe in for 4 seconds and you breathe out for 6 or 7, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically your rest and digest, right? So you're signaling to your body, you're safe, you're calm, you can relax. You don't have to be alert, looking for danger, being on edge. So that's why it's such a perfect complement, or I should say, a really effective coping strategy for anyone with anxiety, because in that state of anxiety, your body is telling you danger is everywhere. We need to be watching out for it. And so when you do that deep breathing, you're telling your brain, hey, shh, it's okay. Calm down. We're okay. We're safe. There are no bears right now, right? There are no like unfriendly, you know, tribes coming, you know, back in our hunter-gatherer days and those sorts of things. So there's actually a scientific basis to deep breathing, and that's why we talk about it all the time. But yes, I would just go on YouTube, search calm breathing exercise, and I think that's a really good one to start with if you're interested in trying deep breathing.
For sure. And I'll put in a plug for Grotto Network. We're releasing some of these mindfulness videos that we partnered with the Hallow app. And we actually had one come out last week that was a breathing exercise that I think is the 4-7-8 method, I think is what we base it off of. So like you said, to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold, and then release for 7 seconds. So
that's
check it out, folks.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. The Hallow app is also really great. I really like them as well. So that's actually really cool. I'm gonna add that to my list of resources. Thank you.
Stay tuned for sure. So question here from @Oscar Gnome. I think this is a really great one. How can I be comfortable enough to talk to a therapist about topics I'm not comfortable discussing with people I already know well?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think one that a lot of people have. So a couple of things that I will say. So one is what makes therapy unique and different than any other type of relationship is that it's confidential. And so what that means, really, there are exceptions to confidentiality, but really what's said in those 4 walls with your therapist stays with that therapist. And because of confidentiality, they can't talk about that with anybody else. The only kind of, they might consult with a fellow therapist, but everything is, you know, bound by confidentiality, and they're not using personally identifiable facts or anything like that. So, so I think that's really important to know, because when you know that things are confidential, that allows that trust between the therapist and the client to be established. So I think that's really important to remember, is that confidentiality is a real thing, and your therapist has to take it seriously, but wants to take it seriously as well. And that's really important. And then I think the other thing to remember is that your therapist is there to help you. They are your teammate on this healing journey. They're working with you. Their job is not to judge you in any way, right? That would accomplish nothing, but that's also not the headspace that your therapist is coming from, right? They're coming from, how can I listen to what you've been experiencing? How can I help you get towards your goals? How can I help you learn? If you've made a mistake, how can I help you learn from your mistake? You know, whatever that is. But I think even when things are hard to talk about, remember that your therapist is there to help you, not to judge you. You know, that's like fundamental things you learn in like day one of your therapist training in graduate school, is just being, how do you be compassionate? How do you be non-judgmental? Because we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. And so that it's just not, it's not your therapist's headspace. I know I'm repeating myself now, but I think that we all carry, I think, this like guilt and shame about things that we've done or things that we think about ourselves. And so I think sometimes we assume that other people will feel that same way, but your therapist is 100% there to help you. And if you want to bring something up, but you're feeling intimidated or you're wondering what they're going to say, bring that up to your therapist. Say there's something I really want to talk about, but I'm not comfortable with it. And they're not going to push you. They're not going to force you to share anything that you're not comfortable with, but they might help you figure out, well, how do we move towards getting more comfortable talking about these things? Or what's standing between you and sharing this, and how can we work through it? So I think, going in and kind of recognizing that therapy is such a unique working relationship that things that maybe you would not say in a typical relationship, or you wouldn't feel comfortable bringing up, or you would think the other person would immediately judge you or be critical, that's not what is happening in therapy, which is kind of amazing to have that place where you can just talk about how you're feeling about stuff, whether it's a popular or unpopular opinion, and your therapist is going to journey along with you and help you figure things out.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful place, and it's amazing to me how 1 hour with someone, but with that sort of relationship, how much better you can feel as a result of it. It really is incredible. So on this topic of other folks in your life, how should someone navigate telling friends or family that they're getting therapy? It can feel embarrassing, and there could be shame there. How would you advise someone to navigate those waters?
I think, and I'm hesitating because it is just a case by case basis, but I do want to give an answer. I don't want to, want to just say it depends. But I think it's important to remember kind of a theme of what we've been talking about tonight, and that is therapy is yours 100%, and that it is yours, that you can choose to share with others that you're in therapy. You don't have to share with others. I think the important thing, though, to remember is that it's not shameful to be in therapy. And so, to really feel like when you tell someone you're in therapy, you're really saying, hey, something wasn't going well in my life, and I took the steps to fix it, and I'm actively working on it, and I'm working with someone who knows how to help me get to where I want to go. Right. And I think that is actually a really empowering thing to do. And so to speak to family and to friends and to say, I'm taking care of my mental health, and this has been a tough year, or I'm really going through something and I really needed help with it. So I think that it's always a personal decision whether or not you want to share, but never feel like you have to hide it from a place of shame, that you can choose to share freely or keep it to yourself. It can be yours, and you don't have to tell anybody, but it's nothing to be ashamed of or to feel guilty about at all. Yeah.
You said it earlier, but if you were to tell someone, I'm going to start seeing a personal trainer, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. It's like you said, it's an empowering thing. It's something to help you get better.
Exactly. I think most people would say, good for you. I'm so happy you're taking charge of your health. And it should be the same for therapy. Well, I think we're moving towards that direction for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk a little bit, one of your specialties is incorporating spirituality and navigating those lines. I know for me, my therapist had very different views on spirituality as I did, and we navigated that. But talk to me a little bit about how someone might incorporate their spiritual life and their therapy life.
I know for a lot of people, if your faith is important to you, your spiritual life is important to you, it can be really hard to feel like you need to explain it or keep it to yourself if you're working with someone who doesn't share the same faith. So if your faith is really important to you, I would recommend finding a therapist who, comes from a similar background or is specifically trained in providing faith-based therapy, which I will expand on in just a second. But I think it's also important to remember that as therapists, we are trained to, and we really value working with our clients' values. So it's really, in a perfect therapy world, it's not about your therapist's political views or religious views. It's about you as the client and your views and working with that. So if a client has a value and their faith is really important to them and related to that value. So maybe it has to do with family and how you interact with family or something like that. As a therapist, you want to work with that client's value and find a way for that to be helpful and part of the healing process. So don't feel like if there's no faith-based therapist in your area that you can't go to therapy. You can find a therapist who is able to take that objective perspective and to really appreciate your worldview, even if it's different from theirs. That's, I think, something that therapists really, really value and try to honor in their sessions. And that, I think, I see that in my own practice. I have clients who are looking for a faith-based therapist, and then I have other clients that I work with because I'm in their zip code. I'm very close and convenient, and so I'm able, I think, to form a good working relationship with everybody, and regardless of our faith beliefs or political beliefs or any of those things. So, but as far as your question of how does one incorporate your faith into therapy, or what would that look like? I'm a big fan of looking at how does your faith inform what your values are and what your goals are, and talking about how those two things can work together. So for example, if really, really simple, but if we're talking about coping strategies, and we're talking about anxiety, or we're talking about depression, or even just stress, looking at how can we weave prayer into maybe some mindfulness practices, or how can we use maybe, I'm a big fan of using the lives of the saints to inform the treatment process. So for example, looking at a saint who struggled with something similar to what my client's going through, and looking at, like, see, this person can live a holy life, they can have this connection with God, and they can be struggling through something emotionally, or going through some kind of suffering in their life. So incorporating your faith into therapy can look a variety of different ways. And I think, me personally, what I tend to do is ask my clients how they live out their faith, and then try to kind of bring some of those similar things into therapy. So I have some clients will start with prayer. I have other clients where we'll talk about the saints, or we might talk about maybe how their faith is contributing to maybe a struggle with what they're going through. They're saying, I believe this, but I'm living this way, and these things, like, I'm feeling this disconnect. How do I get back on the same page? So I think it's, again, that beauty of it's not one size fits all, and that it's personalized, and you can really incorporate your faith in a way that's meaningful to you.
Right.
And to go back to that point when we were talking about, what do you talk about in the first session? What kind of questions do you ask your therapist? Letting them know, my faith is really important to me. And, how do you work with clients whose faith is really important, or how do you incorporate faith into therapy? I think that's a very great question to ask in that first session.
Definitely. We've got a great question here from folks watching. Do I have to talk to my family about what I discuss with my therapist? And if not, how can I make that clear in a polite way?
I think we're talking about boundaries, which I think I could talk about for like a day and a half and forever. So, but no, I think back to what we were talking about earlier. First of all, it's a great question. And I think therapy is yours. And so you can share what you want, and you don't have to share. You can say, I prefer to keep what I talk about with my therapist private, and that's 100% okay. You can say something as simple as, I prefer to keep that to myself, but thank you for asking. And that, that's a simple no, and you don't have to give a lengthy explanation or prove why or say why. I think that's the important thing. This is all I'll say on boundaries, but the important thing with boundaries is that you're communicating to someone what's important to you, and you're asking them to respect that. And then it's up to them to respect it or to not respect it, right? But if you kind of draw that line and say, I prefer to keep things that I talk about in therapy to myself, that is totally okay. And, their reaction doesn't define or legitimize your boundary, right? They can be disappointed, and that's okay. They can be disappointed, and you don't have to change that boundary, and you can choose not to share. Also keep in mind that your family might be asking because they are concerned about you, or they want to be helpful, or they might be being nosy. I mean, that's a reality too. And so, you can kind of assess your comfort level and their motivation for asking and what feels right to you for sharing or not sharing. But it's yours, and you get to choose whether or not you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's a good thing too to remind yourself that it can be great to invite people in to what your struggle is, but sometimes you do need a space to work things through privately, and that takes time to figure out.
Yeah, and it's okay to say you're not ready to share right now, but you might be ready to share later. Or, I mean, it's a great thing to bring up in therapy too and say,
Yeah.
my family's been asking me this and I don't know how to handle, or
Sure.
I don't know what I want. Can you help me? Can you ask me some questions to help me get to a place where I figure out what I want? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Want to get to one more question about spirituality and therapy, because I have found ways for myself that they've really come together. But I think there are still some misconceptions out there that you can just pray away depression or pray away anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about some of those misunderstandings that are still out there and how we might be able to move past them?
Yes. I think that probably one of the most common ones that I hear is actually what you just mentioned, in that there's this, I think, implicit equating mental health and holiness, right? So if we're holy and we're close to God, then we wouldn't be struggling with anxiety, or we wouldn't be struggling with depression. And then that kind of leads into this faulty notion of that somehow if we're experiencing a mental health issue or an emotional health issue, that it's somehow sinful. And that is not the case by any means, right? We would never say that because you broke your leg, you're not a holy person, or because you are struggling with diabetes, that you're not a holy person, and this is because you sinned or a result of your sin. And it's the same thing with our mental health. If you have anxiety, there's a million different reasons why someone might have anxiety, and none of them has to do with the fact that you are not holy enough, right? That God loves us unconditionally. He wants what's good for us. He wants us to come back to him when we make mistakes, but our mental health is not a condition of our holiness or his love for us. And I think we see that in the example of great people throughout history, but I think the saints are just a great, example of that. Saint Therese of Lisieux, she experienced anxiety. She also experienced depression. She had a really difficult relationship when, as a child. St. Ignatius of Loyola struggled with perfectionism. There's just a ton of saints out there. And so I think that's important to remember, that we have these holy men and women who really struggled with emotional wounds or mental health issues, and they were holy. And we recognize that as a church. And so I think that is really important to remember, that God is not punishing you if you're going through a mental health issue or you're struggling. That's not a punishment from God. It's not a sign that you're not holy enough, or that you're unlovable, or that you're a sinner by any means. None of us are perfect, but that has nothing to do with our mental health or God's love for us. So I think that's really important, because that can bring on a lot of shame and guilt unnecessarily. And I think it's really important to correct that notion, because it just kind of like drives us deeper into that despair or that struggle, rather than lifting us up. And God loves us unconditionally, and he's merciful and gives us graces. And so those are all part of the healing process, and good, right? And so focusing on that, I think, is really important. So that's my relatively short answer to that question.
Oh, that's wonderful, though. I think that's so important for folks to hear. And so thank you for that. In our last few minutes here, I just want to turn it over to you to just offer up to our audience and community, and we're going to share this video out after we end our live call here. But any final resources or next steps or words of encouragement that you might have for folks out there listening?
Gosh, so
Big
much
question,
to say.
yeah.
I think first of all, I know, right? First of all, I would say, if you're watching this, whether it's recording or you're watching live now, thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy day and for watching yet another thing on a screen, because I know that we're all dealing with
Right.
little bit of screen fatigue going on. But
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is that I could leave people with is just an invitation to really be your own best friend. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. But I think that life is really hard right now. There are a lot of things that are changing or different, or coping strategies or things that we've used in the past to help us get through difficult times aren't available to us just because of the restrictions that are going on. And so if you are struggling, or you're not doing well, or if you have questions that you need to get answered, to be your own best friend and to say, hey, you go get the help that you need. Don't be ashamed. Don't be scared. Don't come up with a million excuses. Don't say that you don't deserve it. Be your own best friend. Think about, if I had a friend going through this, what would I say to them? And we would say, I'm here for you. I will help you figure it out. I will, help you find a therapist, or you deserve to get better. You deserve to get help. You deserve to figure this out. And so I think we have that inner critic in our head that says, it's not the right time. No one will be able to help you. Why should you even try? What's the point? You're going to be like this forever, miserable, or whatever. And so asking yourself, what would I say to my best friend in this situation? If they came to me and they said all of these things, first of all, you'd probably say, don't talk to yourself like that, right?
Right, yeah.
Be kind to yourself. So I think that's what I would leave with, is just please, don't be afraid to be kind to yourself. You do deserve to be happy, and you do deserve to feel like yourself and that you're living an authentic life. And to not be afraid to reach out and start therapy if you've been thinking about it, because I promise you, it is not as scary as you think it might be. It's not as intimidating as you think it might be. I mean, I don't look scary, or at least I don't think I do. And so, so your therapist will be there to help you. But yes, please be your own best friend. Be kind to yourself. If you feel like you're not yourself, don't be afraid to reach out and get help, because there is help there. And it can actually be, therapy is a very positive and rewarding experience. And I'm telling you that from, my years of working with clients, seeing so many success stories, that just makes me so happy to think about clients who, have grown and healed in amazing ways. And it's all happened because they had the courage to come to therapy and say, I can't do this on my own. I don't have to do this on my own. I can find help with someone. And so don't be afraid to give yourself that gift, right? Of healing and empowerment and all of that. So, those would be my closing words.
Oh, that's wonderful. And it is so true. It's a joyful journey. It's a rewarding journey. It is better than anything you'll get yourself on Amazon this year for Christmas. So it's well worth it.
Yes, it's personalized, right? And even I think when you're talking about difficult or challenging things, it's always through the lens of helping you heal and helping you grow. And so it yes, can be difficult, or you might have to confront some fears or work through some really tough things, but to be able to move through that and come out the other side is just incredibly empowering and life-changing, really.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Julia, where could people learn more about you, your work, or possibly even get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. You can, I guess, if you are on Instagram and watching this, you can always check out my page there. I have links to my website and everything. So it's at Julia Hogan LCPC, or you can go to my website, which is juliamariehogan.com. And then that also has a link to my private practice as well. Because that name's a little long. It's vitaoptimumcounseling.com.
Gotcha.
So, but juliamariehogan.com or Julia Hogan LCPC on Instagram. And then I've got links to my writing, my book. I've got some workshops there, and you're free to send me a message. I can't necessarily give you counseling advice, but I can always connect you with some resources and make some general recommendations there too. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, Julia, thank you so much for your time tonight. This has been so great for me, and I hope it's been great for everyone who's been watching. We will be posting this later, so please share with any friend who might benefit from this. I also want to just give a thank you to our Sunday visitor who is helping provide support for this live session. And just everyone who's watched, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Learn more at Grotto Network. We have a whole campaign in the weeks ahead with more information around mental health resources, including some more great stuff from Julia. So thank you all for watching. And Julia from Boise, Idaho,
For having
have a
me.
wonderful night. Absolutely. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. It was a joy.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.